Wiki, your right-wing English teacher, addressing an issue today that I don't think has ever been spoken about before that I know of. Now, it's not that I'm incredibly well-read. I'm somewhat well-read, and next to the average Joe, I am extremely well-read. But as far as well-read people go, I am far from being the most well-read of the well-read. So, I'm not sure if this point has been made before somewhere else, more eloquently, but it seems to me that it's worth talking about. And that is, it seems to me that within Russian literature, as within all literature, and as within all literature, as within all thinking in general, there are two types of people. There's the Tolstoys among us, and then there's the Dostoyevskys among us. Now, I don't have a speck of Russian ancestry that I know of, and so I don't speak from any kind of chauvinism here, but the Russian propensity to literature is one that is, well, impressive. I'm not sure what exactly explains it. What is it that makes the Russian soul so lend itself so well to novel writing, to play writing, to short story writing? But there is something to it. There's a certain kind of intensity of spirit that seems uniquely Russian. And so, as a result, the entire panoply of Russian writing is huge, it is expansive. It contains multitudes. And within those multitudes, there are two, it seems to me, from my own perspective, which again is not the most informed, but is not totally uninformed either. So take it for whatever you want to take it for. But it does seem to me that there are two spirits that are most prevalent, that compete with one another for dominance in the Russian soul, and thus in the human soul generally. The Tolstoyan perspective versus the Dostoevskian perspective. The Tolstoyan perspective thinks of man as a being who in his nature is actually deep down good, noble, worthy, but sees history, culture, society as having really scrambled the soul of man beyond repair. Well, not beyond repair. I shouldn't say that. That sounds Dostoevskian, which I'm tipping my hand there, giving myself away. Giving my own allegiance away. But the Tolstoyan would say not beyond repair, but very much. But the corruption is very, very real. Tolstoy speaks with a great deal of reverence for the peasant soul, the simple man, the one who has not been corrupted by society, who has not been taken in by the institutions of society. The Tolstoyan perspective sees it as the task of man to get past the accretions that have, the barnacles that have gathered on his soul and weighed him down and again dirtied him, corrupted him, rendered him filthy. It's his task to see past these harmful, malignant illusions and to reach down into the goodness with which he was created, which is his birthright. The Dostoevskian, on the other hand, sees man as an inherently depraved creature. Not a creature for whom there is no salvation possible. Dostoevsky is not a nihilist, although he flirts with nihilism often. And he gets a little too close for comfort much of the time. You know, if you are a reader of Dostoevsky and you are a Christian, you recognize him as your own. You know that he confessed to being Christian, that he embraced the Orthodox Church, and that he was a deeply conservative in his perspective on such matters as culture. Or he became that way. He started out as a revolutionary, but after he was nearly executed, in fact, he was on the chopping block. He was about to be set before a firing squad, and his sentence was commuted at the very last minute. It was at that point when he regained his life, still as a relatively young man, and then went on to live for decades longer, lived to be an old man, and wrote extensively for the rest of his life. It was at that moment that he turned things around more or less, and came to embrace what we have come to know as the Dostoevskian perspective. To Dostoevsky, man is a depraved creature. In Notes from Underground, he has his underground man make this point very emphatically several times, that if man is offered what is good for him, he will reject it. He doesn't want it. He's not a reasonable being. He's not a rational being. If he's given a choice between a freedom that he knows, and by choosing freedom, he knows he'll basically be on the road to hell, and choosing to be systematized, to become a cog in the wheel of a system that will, he's told, save him. He'll choose to be free, even if it means his damnation. And this is a point that Dostoevsky makes most emphatically, in particular, in a crystallized way in Notes from Underground, but it's a theme that pervades much of his work. And he's a writer who's very interested in covering men who others would think of as the dregs of civilization, which is something that Tolstoy, to his defense, did as well. Tolstoy dared to write about an adulteress, Anna Karenina, and other characters who were not, shall we say, the best people, the people who made the best choices, people who made tragic choices. So they share that in common. But for Dostoevsky, the fact that his characters make these choices, that they choose to be evil, that they choose to do wicked things, is an essential part of what it means to be human. Not that man is necessarily going to do evil, wicked things, but simply that man is a creature who gravitates towards that which is depraved much of the time. And it's the Dostoevskian, of course, schema, the Dostoevskian perspective, that is most conducive to the Christian notion of original sin. That man's redemption must come from without in some manner, and it must come through grace. For Tolstoy, there's not really an issue of grace. Grace isn't really something he believes in. There's no need for grace, because what necessitates grace is original sin, or propensity for wickedness and depravity. That's the kind of picture where grace must enter in for our salvation, for man's salvation. But for Tolstoy, that's not ever the issue. The issue is rather getting back to who we were, digging back down to the pure being that we were before we were corrupted by the institutions of man, the institutions which ensnare us, which includes the church, which Tolstoy is very, very down on, as well as many other things. And even Tolstoy's vaunted, or by some, vaunted perspectives on sex and marriage, which are seen as quite radical, and are quite radical, as revealed in the Kreutzer Sonata, especially what could be called his aesthetic, as far as marriage goes. And Tolstoy was not an aesthetic. He was far from an aesthetic in his life, or an ascetic in his life. He had many lovers. But his perspective on all of that is, even while it's radical, it's still an essential part of his entire reformist idea. Ultimately, Tolstoy is a reformist. He believes that reform is possible if one strives hard enough to reach down into the purity that is his essential self. For Dostoevsky, there is no reform. Man is a creature that is beyond reform. And existence is much more of an enigma. And while this perspective often flirts, as I said, with a kind of nihilism, it is in this perspective, from this perspective, that one can see the intrusion of grace. So that's my take on Tolstoyism versus Dostoyevskyism. Let me know what you think. Andy Nowicki, your right-wing English teacher, signing off.